driving home late at night. It was a dark night with a full moon. I was driving through a forested area, so it was pitch black in some spots. After about half an hour, a sudden fog appeared, but I didn't pay much attention to it initially, as it was common there. I don't know why I looked out the window, but when I did, I saw something. It was some kind of creature moving alongside my car. It had large black eyes and 2 rows of sharp, inhuman teeth that glowed. Fear and trembling overcame me. But the scariest part was yet to come. The fog disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. Suddenly, the moonlight illuminated the creature I saw. It was carrying a head by its hair and its teeth. It was the face of a woman, but it was mutilated. The eyes were gouged out, the tongue was missing, and the nose was torn off. It was a horrifying sight. I pressed the gas pedal even harder, but it kept running alongside me until I left the forest. After 2 days, I calmed down because I hadn't seen it again. On the 3rd day, while watching TV, I saw on the local news that a mutilated, decapitated woman's body had been found in the forest area. I immediately remembered that incident, but I didn't dare go to the police. I called work and said I was taking a few days off. I stayed home for 4 days, but then decided to go back to work. The road there was fine, but I was still anxious. On the way back, my fear of seeing it again intensified. And so it happened. The fog appeared again and I saw it was carrying the head again. I turned away and didn't want to look, just drove, hoping to get away quickly. When I arrived, I was already losing my mind and decided to move to another city. The next day, I put my apartment up for sale, packed half of my things, called a friend, and asked to stay with him until I sold the apartment and bought a new one in the city. I loaded my things, got in the car, and left. I arrived without any incidents. I lived with my friend for about 2 weeks. Buyers were found quite quickly. We set a date for the meeting, but I had to drive in the evening again. Fear was always present within me. The fog started, and I felt it was a bad sign. My expectations were met, but this time it was running without the head and its teeth. This was what I feared. Had it chosen me as its victim? After driving a bit further, the car suddenly stopped. I didn't understand why, since it was in good condition and had a full tank of gas. I feared only one thing, that it wouldn't get inside the car. As it was walking nearby, suddenly it jumped in front of the car, and the headlights revealed its full appearance. It looked as if its skin had been removed. Its long arms and legs with huge claws were covered in blood. Its face, as I mentioned, had only eyes and teeth, and its ears were misshapen and pointed. It walked around the car and tried to attack. I started crying and praying that it wouldn't get inside. Then it started banging hard on the window. I moved further back. I saw the glass beginning to crack and lost consciousness. I came to when it was already light outside, and my face was covered in blood. Looking in the mirror, I saw many scratches on my face, blood oozing from my hand, and some hair missing from the back of my head. I don't know what happened after I passed out, but it seems it could only reach me with its claws and couldn't fit through the window. But why some hair was pulled from the back of my head, I will never know. I got behind the wheel. The car started, which was strange, and I quickly drove to my former apartment. Without explaining anything, I signed the papers and told them to come to the city where I now lived for any further procedures with all the documents. This incident left a deep, dark mark on my life and psyche. Now, I don't drive near forests at night, and I try not to drive through them, even during the day. I never go to forests or nature trips anymore. Alexei was driving home from fishing late at night, passing through a forest. With about 25 kilometers left to home, he decided to pull over and sleep until morning, so he could drive home safely in a well-rested state. He reclined the front seat, closed all the windows and doors, turned off the engine, and lay down. He quickly fell asleep, but it didn't last long. He woke up to the sound of someone knocking on his window. He looked around but saw no one. Alexei thought it must have been tree branches falling, or perhaps he imagined it. He lay back down but couldn't fall asleep again. He sat up and started looking out the window, noticing some movement in the distance of the forest. A forest animal, Alexei thought. But within a few minutes he realized it wasn't an animal, but a person. This person started approaching the car. Alexei decided to turn on the headlights to see if the person needed help. As soon as he did, he was horrified. The person was almost 3 meters tall, very large, with a face covered in scars. Alexei was genuinely terrified as this figure was coming towards him, just 20 to 30 meters away. The creature looked straight into Alexei's eyes, approaching with a menacing demeanor. Alexei decided to step on the gas, but the car wouldn't move. It turned out someone had attached a powerful cable from the car to a tree. The creature was now very close. It picked up a rock and threw it at the windshield. Alexei quickly opened the door and ran into the forest. He ran for about 10 minutes before stopping to catch his breath. But then he heard footsteps coming from the forest. Alexei was exhausted but tried to keep running with his last bit of strength. While running, he stepped on something sharp, like a nail. He fell, and blood started flowing from his leg. He looked at the ground and noticed something like traps, such as boards with nails sticking up. He had his phone and called the police, but couldn't accurately explain his location. The dispatcher took it as a prank call. Meanwhile, Alexei tried to crawl towards some light, but it was a mistake. When he got closer, he saw a campfire, and sitting near it was the creature. It noticed him and said in a raspy voice, "You crawled right to me." Alexei stood up and tried to run, but the wounds on his legs prevented him, and he fell, losing consciousness. Alina received a text message, "Honey, I won't be coming home tonight. Met an old friend. He was missing for a week." And Alina reported her husband's disappearance to the police. Another week passed, and she received a package. She opened it and was horrified. Inside was Alexei's head and a note that read, "I have returned." "Couldn't we have parked a bit closer?" I asked, shrugging off the heavy backpack, which was filled with both useful items and a bunch of useless junk, and felt like it weighed half a ton. "No way, buddy. You can see for yourself. It's hard enough to walk here, let alone drive," Valera replied, following my example and freeing himself from the load he'd been carrying on his shoulders. "We've been trudging through this damned forest for 2 hours. Even though you said the cabin was just a stone's throw away," Andre grumbled, giving Valera a reproachful look before sitting down on a fallen tree trunk. "Stop whining, we're almost there." "Just another 20 minutes and we'll be at the cabin," Valera muttered, pulling a bottle from his backpack and taking big gulps. "Hey, Valor, are you sure we're not lost?" I asked, glancing around nervously. The forest made me uneasy. There was an unsettling feeling, and I couldn't quite understand why. Valera had warned us that the place we were heading to was full of anomalies and strange phenomena. It seemed like an ordinary forest, but something was off. First of all, it was eerily silent, except for the occasional creaking of trees, making it feel like one might collapse and crush us at any moment. Secondly, the forest was so dense with bushes and grass that moving through it was extremely difficult, which was why we were barely making progress, even though, according to Valera, our destination was only about 3 kilometers from where we left the car. But the strangest thing was the intense cold in this place. I was shivering uncontrollably, even though it had been scorching hot when we left the car. On top of that, the sunlight seemed to refuse to penetrate through the tree canopies, creating a perpetual twilight. Valera was about to say something, but Andre interrupted him. "By the way, what's the deal with this cabin? And how did you find out about it?" he asked, finishing a sandwich and washing it down with hot tea from a thermos. "It's a long story, but if you're really interested, I can tell you on the way. It might help break the monotony and distract us from this place." "Deal," Andre concluded, and an eerie silence fell over us. We sat in complete silence for a while, each lost in our thoughts. Then Valera signaled that it was time to move on. Sitting was nice, but we all wanted to reach the cabin as soon as possible and relax there. We nodded in agreement, picked up our bags, and followed our leader. "Do you still want to hear the story about this cabin?" our guide asked, looking around. "Of course," Andre said enthusiastically, walking ahead and occasionally whipping me in the face with branches he pushed aside to get through, which was starting to annoy me. "This forest is so ancient that some people believe it has existed since the beginning of time. For as long as humanity can remember, this forest has always been here. Many legends and tales have been spun around it, some of which can be found on the internet, while others are almost forgotten. The essence of the stories is that strange and terrifying creatures inhabit these woods: demons, witches, sorcerers, and other evil entities. Some claim that the gates of hell are here. Others say that beings from other civilizations gather here, and some believe this land is cursed. Allegedly, sect members who once lived here worshipped various spirits, deities, and supernatural forces, committing dark deeds and spilling the blood of many innocent people. But I digress. In the early 20th century, a scientist whose name I don't know decided to investigate the truth behind the legends and moved to this forest. He built himself a hut, not a bad one actually, you'll see when we get there. He brought the essentials and started studying the surrounding areas, recording all his findings in a journal. What happened to him is unknown. His body was never found. In the mid-90s, my father hid from gangsters in these woods. I don't know what he did or why they were after him, but he was in serious danger. He stumbled upon the cabin and stayed there for quite a while until things settled down. He lived mostly on mushrooms, berries, and occasionally managed to catch some game like a hare or deer. He also sometimes fished in a nearby pond, which was small but had drinkable water, so his life gradually improved. He liked the cabin so much that he decided to fix it up, replacing the rotten cladding and repairing the roof. When things finally calmed down and people either forgot about him or assumed he had rotted away in some swamp, my father returned to the city, rebuilt his life, got married, and then I was born. However, every summer he would come back here, spending at least a month, if not two. I never understood why he was so drawn to this place like a magnet. "So what happened to that scientist? And why did you bring him up?" I asked, once again whipping me in the face with a branch. Jerk, I thought. Hissing but continuing to walk and not falling behind. "Oh right, the scientist. Well, my dad found something there, some notes, journals, research on this place and its phenomena." "And where is all that now?" I asked, gradually speeding up to pass Andre, who was getting on my nerves. "They got lost somehow, but my father told me a lot about them," Valera said. Then added, "But one day he told me something so extraordinary that at first I laughed, thinking it was a joke. But when I saw his face, I realized he was serious." "So what are you waiting for?" "We're all ears," Andre exclaimed excitedly, like a kid asking his grandpa for another story. "All right. I'll try to recount it in his words. It'll be easier that way. That summer was extremely hot, causing many forest fires. However, the area where the cabin is located was miraculously spared. Even the massive clouds of smoke that covered entire cities and regions didn't penetrate this territory. Some might call it a miracle, others would say it's devilry. But the unusual nature of this event is undeniable. I spent my time enjoying myself hunting, gathering mushrooms, and just walking through the forest, soaking in the beauty and nature. One unremarkable evening, I decided to set some traps, hoping to catch some game for a meal. So I set up about 5 traps and headed back to the cabin to prepare dinner and take care of other tasks. The sun was slowly setting, and darkness was gradually enveloping the forest. Sitting at the table, I was cleaning my rifle and trying to tune the radio to any station, when suddenly, through the static, I heard a howl so terrifying that it made my hair stand on end. For about half a minute there was dead silence. Then the same howl echoed again, only this time it was much louder and more frightening. I quickly grabbed what I needed and ran outside. In one hand I held a flashlight. and in the other I tightly gripped the rifle. Taking a deep breath, I stepped forward, immediately detecting a strange smell, more like a stench. It smelled of rot, decaying flesh. It reeked of death, and I could feel it deep inside. As I stood there, shining my flashlight in all directions, hoping to spot something, I suddenly heard the sound of chains rattling nearby, the same chains I had used to secure the traps to the nearest trees. At that moment, I realized one thing: the creature caught in the trap couldn't free itself, but somehow managed to break the chain and was now rushing towards me at great speed. I dashed back into the cabin, locked the door with every available lock, and hid, trying not even to breathe. Soon, a powerful blow struck the door, making me think it would fly off its hinges and whatever was outside would come in and tear me to pieces. But miraculously, the door held, and then the unwelcome visitor turned its attention to the window, which it shattered with a single blow and began crawling inside. I nearly lost my mind from fear, my hands trembling like I had Parkinson's disease, and a lump formed in my throat. The creature was already inside the cabin. I could hear it clearly, but was too scared to leave my hiding spot, even though I was clutching my double-barreled shotgun the whole time. The beast growled, and I felt a tightness inside me. When it got very close, I made a desperate move. I jumped out of my hiding place, shined the flashlight in the creature's face, temporarily blinding it, hoping to buy some time, and started moving towards the door, aiming to escape the cabin. What I saw standing about 2 meters away from me was indescribable. It wasn't human or even an animal. It was something not from our world. An enormous head sprouted numerous appendages resembling underdeveloped human arms from afar. It had huge, round eyes with dark red veins, and I swear each had 3 pupils. Its massive mouth was filled with large, curved tusks like an elephant's and countless sharp, smaller teeth. The monstrosity had 3 legs, unevenly attached to its body, as if some mad doctor had sewn them on haphazardly. One leg was adorned with one of my traps. Additionally, the creature had 2 powerful arms nearly reaching the ground. I backed away, observing this grotesque scene, unable to comprehend how or where such a creature had come into our world. In one swift moment, the hellspawn tried to lunge at me, but my good reflexes and training kicked in, and I managed to pull the trigger just in time. The bullet struck its chest, causing the beast to collapse to the floor, breaking several floorboards with its weight. Unfortunately, it was quicker than I anticipated. Before I could blink, it was already gaining speed and charging towards me. My second shot was a failure. The bullet hit one of its tusks, causing virtually no damage. I should have brought turbine bullets, I thought, as the creature was just a step away. With a swift motion, it broke my arm at the forearm, the one holding the shotgun, then grabbed me by the neck, lifting me off the ground, staring straight into my eyes. I mentally said my goodbyes to life several times over, but just as the creature was about to bite off my head, I remembered the knife attached to my belt. Drawing it quickly, I stabbed the monster in its left eye. I felt my ribs crack against the wall when the beast hurled me with incredible force. Then, with the knife still lodged in its head, it leapt through the shattered window and disappeared. I made several attempts to get up, but it was futile. My body wouldn't obey, and the pain was so intense that I howled in agony, like a wounded wolf. A few minutes later, I lost consciousness. "That's the story," Valera said, and fell silent. "And what happened next?" asked Andre, clearly impressed by the tale. "Nothing much. My father came to his senses the next evening, managed to give himself some first aid, and by the next morning he made it to the city where doctors took care of him." "I see," I said. "What exactly?" both my companions asked, surprised. "I understand why he came here every summer." "And why's that?" Andre asked, looking at me as if I were crazy. "He was hunting that creature," I replied, noting that we had reached our destination. "By the way, here it is. Beautiful, isn't it?" Valera said, spreading his arms proudly. Indeed, the cabin was quite large and well maintained, more like a proper cottage than a shack. Next to it was a small shed, presumably for storing tools and other equipment, as well as an outdoor toilet. All right, here's the plan. I'll take care of the generator. Andre, you tidy up the cabin. And Sonia, you handle cooking the meat and preparing other snacks. Any questions? Valera said, rummaging in his pocket for the keys to the large lock that kept us from entering the house. No questions, I said. And almost immediately, we each started on our tasks. About 2 hours later, everything was done, and we were sitting around the campfire with full stomachs, discussing various topics and simply enjoying nature and the wonderful atmosphere. You're not here just to relax. Are you? I asked Valera when Andre went off to deal with the drinks he'd had earlier. Ear sharp, he replied with a smile. That creature still bothers you, I continued. Not exactly. My dad dealt with that monster. It was the creation of that scientist, I'm sure of it. And believe me, it wasn't his only experiment. Who knows what other creatures roam these parts, lurking, maybe even watching us from the thick woods right now. Besides, agree, there are plenty of anomalies and strange phenomena here, which I warned you about before we came. So I don't advise leaving our humble abode after dark, Valera said, pouring another round of drinks. And remember, you guys wanted some thrills, to visit places that give you the chills and scare you well. Here you go. When Andre returned, he said he wasn't feeling well and would probably head to bed or watch a movie on the laptop we had preloaded with films. We nodded and continued chatting about random things. As it got completely dark, we decided to join our friend and check on him. When we entered one of the rooms, we were met with a disturbing sight. Andre was sitting on the floor with his back to the door and his face to the wall, shaking as if he had spent a day in freezing cold. As I got closer, I noticed tufts of gray hair on his head. Despite our questions about what had happened, we received no coherent answers. Andre just muttered and rocked back and forth. I was so worried about my friend's behavior that I didn't immediately notice the old VCR and a similarly ancient Sharp TV from the 90s on the wooden floor in front of him, showing white noise on the screen. Where did you get this? Valera barked at Andre, who ignored us and stared blankly. Realizing he wouldn't get anywhere with that approach, Valera slapped Andre hard, snapping him back to reality. This can't be happening, Valera exclaimed fearfully. My father brought this electronics here with the generator after my mother died, and it disappeared later. Where did it come from? He repeated. I thought you guys were playing a prank on me, Andre replied in a trembling voice. When I came into the room, I saw arrows on the floor, drawn in something that looked like blood, slimy and disgusting, leading me straight to this wall where the equipment was. There was a tape on the VCR, and my name was written on it in the same substance that was on the floor. So I thought it was you guys. What did you see? I asked. It was me. On that video, damn it. You could see me leaving the cabin, running away, stumbling, falling, getting up, and continuing to run through the forest. Someone was chasing and filming me from behind, but I couldn't see who it was. Several times I turned around, and you could see my face twisted in horror. After a while, I fell into the bushes, and immediately someone invisible entered the bushes, breaking branches and rustling leaves, followed by a terrifying scream. It was me screaming, the me on the video, and then everything went quiet. The person filming brought the camera close to my face, and then tears rolled down his cheeks as Andre clutched his head and wailed. I wanted to tell him to continue, but Valera stopped me, gesturing that we needed to step aside and talk. We went to the kitchen. I lit a cigarette, and my friend poured himself a shot, drank it, and immediately poured another. He's a dead man, Valera said, angrily throwing the bottle against the wall, shattering it into pieces. What are you talking about? I yelled at him. You don't understand. He saw his own death, saw what's going to happen to him soon. The moment he put the tape in the VCR, he doomed himself. We have our scientist to thank for that. I don't know how, but he managed to trap an ancient evil in electronic devices. I can't say which device was the original host for this spirit or whatever it is, but I know it can change hosts. Imagine it being trapped in an old camera, then moving to more modern devices as they appear. It's cunning and devious, capable of illusions and deception. It will try to lure you, make you do what it wants. If it succeeds, you're dead, and no one can help you. That's all I know. All my father told me about this phenomenon. One more thing, if you watch the video, you'll see how you're going to die. No matter how you try to change it, you won't succeed. The end is always the same as what's on the tape, but we didn't watch it, so we're safe, I said. You're wrong, buddy. As I said, it will do everything to make us act the way it wants. Hallucinations, visions, and other horrors await us, so be prepared, Valera added, leaning against the wall and sighing heavily. Is there no way out of this, I asked, sitting down and holding my head in my hands. There is, my friend replied. The only way is to survive until dawn. But honestly, I don't think we'll make it. But we'll try, I muttered. And at that moment, I noticed a shadow darting down the corridor. Don't bother, you won't help him, Valera said, as I was about to chase after Andre. A moment later, the front door slammed shut, and through the open windows, we heard hurried footsteps, followed by a dull thud, as if a sack of potatoes had been dropped on the ground, then the same footsteps gradually fading away. In the distance, a horrifying scream echoed, making me shudder, and then there was silence. This is all my fault. His death is on my conscience. I knew we shouldn't have come here. I knew this place was full of evil and anomalies. Why did I agree to this? Valera covered his face with his hands and started to cry. You're right, but unfortunately, we can't bring him back. However, we can try to survive ourselves. We need to stick together. That way, our chances, however small, will increase. So let's think about what we should do next, I said, and Valera nodded in agreement. We need to destroy that thing, I concluded, and we cautiously moved towards the room. When we entered, I saw that there were 2 tapes on the VCR, labeled with our names. Another strange thing was that neither the TV nor the VCR was plugged in, yet they were functioning without electricity. I approached, grabbed the TV, and threw it against the wall. However, to my surprise and disappointment, nothing changed. It's useless, my friend said, and sat down on the couch. I followed his example. We need to wait out the rest of the night. There are at least 5 hours until dawn. Hang in there, buddy. Then strange things started happening. I began to see and hear things that shouldn't be there. Horrific messages appeared on the walls and ceiling, and a whisper behind me said, "You're mine." I jerked around but found nothing there, as expected. As it turned out, Valera was also seeing and feeling things, though slightly different. We realized each of us was facing our own nightmare. Something growled to the left, and behind us, there was a disturbing sound like bones cracking. Black, thick liquid dripped from the ceilings and walls, landing on my clothes, face, and eyes. I could literally smell the stench in the room. Suddenly, the lights went out, leaving us in semi-darkness, illuminated only by the TV screen, which continued to show the white noise interspersed with creepy images. Something grabbed my leg and started dragging me towards the door. I kicked and clawed at the wooden floor, tearing my nails, screaming for Valera to help, but he just stared at me. I noticed his face contorting into a horrific, inhuman smile. It looked like his skin had been flayed and then crudely reattached. The thing dragging me began gnawing at my leg, tearing off large chunks of flesh with sharp claws and shoving them into its mouth. I screamed and writhed in pain until I finally lost consciousness. I jumped up from the couch in horror, grabbing my leg, feeling it to make sure everything was all right. There were no injuries or damage. Everything I had just experienced was nothing but an illusion, but so convincing that anyone would have taken it for reality. Valera sat next to me, seemingly lost in his own nightmares, his eyes vacant. He stared at a single point, not blinking for several minutes. I felt a slight breeze, and turning around, saw a strange, incomprehensible creature climbing through the window. With its appearance, the room filled with disgusting, ugly insects trying to crawl into my mouth, nose, and ears. The thing that had entered the room looked like a human, but only in the upper half. The lower half resembled a giant caterpillar with numerous tiny limbs on which it moved. In an instant, the creature grabbed my arm and broke it at the elbow, bending it backward. I screamed, but immediately received a powerful blow to the stomach. Then the creature shoved its paw into my mouth and with a crunch, tore off my lower jaw. Blood gushed out, and the creature pointed a pathetic semblance of a finger at the VCR, which still had one tape left. Valera, the thought flashed through my mind, and then I came to my senses, sitting on the couch just like before. Everything that had happened was another deception. I didn't know what nightmares my friend had gone through, but he couldn't take it and had watched the tape meant for him. He sat beside me, looking ahead with resignation in his eyes. Andriusha is waiting for me. "Goodbye, buddy," he said, then stood up, threw me the car keys, and headed for the exit. When the front door opened, I heard a horrific scream and the sounds of flesh tearing. Then the door slammed shut, and silence fell. I was alone in this cursed place, but I managed to survive and see the dawn unharmed. However, I will never forget what I went through. Those horrific creatures and beings, those worlds and dimensions, the pain, fear, and despair I experienced that night will forever haunt my memories and torment me for many nights to come. That morning, I left the cabin, but not before burning it to the ground. It was the right thing to do. I ran through the forest, gasping for breath, scratching my face on branches, tripping and falling, but I refused to give up. At a certain point, I made it to the highway, and then to where we had left the car. I was saved, but at what cost? 3 days after those events, I found a strange folder on my smartphone. Inside was a video file titled "For Alexander,"